The acid rain fell in sheets across the barren landscape of Terrace Prime, a forgotten world at the edge of civilized space. Princess Ryana of the Zarin Empire dragged herself beneath a rocky outcropping, clutching the wound in her side where her former captain of the guard had run her through with a ceremonial blade. "A gift from the council," he had whispered as the blade slid between her ribs. "Long live the true Zarin Empire." The betrayal hurt more than the wound itself. After months of building her rebellion, gathering supporters from the outer colonies who were tired of the nobility's exploitation, she had finally been ready to confront the council directly. Instead, her inner circle, people she had trusted with her life, had turned on her in the middle of the night. They'd drugged her, loaded her onto a transport, and dumped her on this desolate rock to die alone. Blood seeped through her fingers as she pressed against the wound. Her royal garments, once pristine white and gold, were now torn and stained with crimson and dirt. The elaborate markings etched into her skin, the living record of her royal lineage, seemed to burn in the dim light. "I won't die here," she hissed through clenched teeth. "I won't give them the satisfaction." But determination couldn't stop blood loss. As the rain continued to pound outside her meager shelter, darkness crept in at the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before consciousness faded was a figure, silhouetted against the stormy sky. Thorn hadn't planned on finding anything valuable during his scavenging run. Terrace Prime was mostly picked clean by now, just another depleted mining world abandoned by the Empire once its resources were exhausted. But the storm had forced him to take a detour through an unexplored canyon, and that's when his scanner picked up an anomalous life sign. He'd expected to find a wounded animal or perhaps one of the indigenous creatures that occasionally emerged from the deeper caves. Instead, he found a woman, clearly not human, with the distinctive silver-blue skin of the Zarin royal family and those unmistakable markings that told the story of her bloodline. "Well, hell," he muttered, kneeling beside her. His scanner confirmed she was still alive, but barely. The wound was deep and already showing signs of infection from the planet's toxic atmosphere. Every instinct told him to walk away. Helping royalty, especially a Zarin, was a death sentence. The Empire controlled everything in this sector of space, and they didn't look kindly on deserters like him. But as he turned to leave, her eyes fluttered open, fierce, defiant, burning with a will to live that he recognized all too well. "Guess we're both too stubborn to die," he said, reaching for his medkit. He applied a sealing agent to her wound and administered a broad-spectrum antibiotic. Then, with gentle but efficient movements, he lifted her onto his hoversled and secured her against the coming journey. "My name's Thorn," he said, though he wasn't sure she could hear him, "and I think I just made the worst decision of my life." As he guided the hoversled toward his hidden shelter, he didn't notice the distant flash of a ship breaking atmosphere, the first Imperial scout arriving to confirm the princess's death. Ryan awoke to the sound of machinery humming. The ceiling above her was metal, patched in places with mismatched panels. She tried to sit up but fell back with a gasp as pain lanced through her side. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," a gruff voice said. "That wound needs at least another day with the regenerator." She turned her head to see a man sitting at a workbench, his back to her as he tinkered with some device. His shoulders were broad, his hair a tangled mess of dark curls streaked with gray. When he turned, she saw a face weathered by harsh conditions and decorated with a scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. "Where am I?" she demanded, instinctively trying to sound regal despite her position. He snorted, "My home, not exactly the royal palace you're used to, princess." Ryana stiffened. "How do you?" "Those markings on your skin aren't exactly subtle." He gestured to the elaborate patterns that spiraled across her exposed arms and neck. "I may be a scavenger now, but I wasn't always. I know Zarin royalty when I see it." She studied him warily. "And you didn't turn me in." "To who? There's nobody on this rock except miners and outcasts." He turned back to his work. "Besides, I'm not exactly on friendly terms with the Empire myself." Days passed slowly in Thorn's bunker, a repurposed mining facility burrowed into the side of a cliff. As Ryana regained her strength, she began to learn about her reluctant savior. Thorn had been a soldier in the Imperial forces before deserting after the Fieros massacre, when his unit had been ordered to wipe out an entire settlement of peaceful colonists who had refused to surrender their land for mining operations. "I couldn't do it," he said simply, as they shared a meal of synthetic protein and hydroponically grown vegetables. So I ran. The council told our people that was a terrorist attack, Ryana said quietly. They used it to justify increased military presence in the outer colonies. Thorne's laugh was bitter. They would. When she was strong enough to move around, Thorne began teaching her how to survive on Terrace Prime. The planet's atmosphere was breathable but toxic with long exposure, requiring filtration masks for ventures outside. The acid rain would eat through unprotected flesh in minutes, and the temperature swings between day and night were extreme. Your fancy clothes won't last a day out there, he said, tossing her a bundle of synthetic materials. These are treated to resist the acid, not pretty, but they'll keep you alive. Ryana examined the rough garments with distaste, but put them on without complaint. Her royal upbringing had taught her adaptability, even if it had never prepared her for this. Their first expedition outside was to check Thorne's traplines, ingenious contraptions designed to catch the small reptilian creatures that were one of the few edible food sources on the planet. Watch your step, he warned as they navigated a rocky slope. The ground can give way without warning. As if on cue, the stone beneath Ryana's foot crumbled. She slid several feet before catching herself, scraping her hands raw on the rough terrain. I said watch your step, Thorne grumbled, reaching down to help her up. I'm not used to this kind of terrain, she admitted, accepting his hand despite her pride. You're going to have to get used to it if you want to survive. The Empire thinks you're dead, and that's the only advantage you've got right now. That night, as they sat by the heat generator in Thorne's bunker, Ryana found herself telling him about the rebellion she had led. How she had refused an arranged marriage to the warlord of the Krell Confederacy. How she had gathered supporters from those oppressed by the Council's policies, and how her own trusted advisors had ultimately betrayed her. They feared I was becoming too powerful, she said, staring into the red glow of the generator. That I would actually succeed in overthrowing the Council and returning power to the people. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. People don't like change even when they need it. What about you? She asked. What do you believe in other than survival? He met her gaze, and for the first time she saw something beyond wariness in his eyes. I believe in doing what's right, even when it costs you everything. That's why I'm here, isn't it? As they held each other's gaze across the dim room, both realized that despite their differences, they shared something fundamental, a refusal to compromise their principles, no matter the cost. Outside, in the toxic darkness of Terrace Prime, a second Imperial scout ship landed silently on the far side of the canyon. The abandoned mining outpost creaked with the constant winds of Terrace Prime. Inside, Ryana sat cross-legged on the floor, carefully disassembling and cleaning one of Thorne's old pulse rifles. Her slender blue fingers, once adorned only with ceremonial rings, now moved with practiced precision among the weapon's components. You're getting better at that, Thorne observed, dropping a bag of supplies he'd scavenged from a collapsed tunnel. 2 months had passed since he'd found her bleeding in the rain, and the change in her was remarkable. The imperious princess was still there in her posture, in the lift of her chin when she disagreed with him, but she had adapted to survival with a determination that impressed him. The basic principles aren't so different from the ceremonial weapons I trained with, she replied, reassembling the rifle with a series of satisfying clicks. Though these are more practical. Thorne settled across from her, pulling out their map of the surrounding region. We need to extend our perimeter. The acid storms have depleted the hunting grounds to the east. Ryana nodded, but her mind seemed elsewhere. It's the Festival of Ascension today, she said suddenly. What's that? A celebration of the founding of the Zarin Empire. The royal family, her voice caught. My family would appear before the people, renew our vows to serve and protect. There would be feasts, music. She trailed off, lost in memory. You miss it, Thorne said, not a question. I miss what it should have been, her eyes hardened. The council turned it into propaganda, another way to pacify the masses while they stripped away freedoms. That's why I had to act. Ryana rarely spoke of her rebellion, but tonight something had opened the floodgates. She told Thorne how she had built her resistance movement from the ground up, starting with workers in the mineral processing facilities, then gaining support from planetary governors who resented the council's increasing demands. We were close to something real, a true revolution that would have restored the Zarin Empire to its original purpose, protecting its citizens rather than exploiting them. Her voice grew bitter. Then Vance betrayed me. You're captain of the guard, and my cousin by marriage. He always resented that I, a woman, would inherit the throne instead of him. She laughed hollowly. He probably thought the council would reward him with power. They likely killed him the moment he delivered me to them. Thorne was quiet for a moment. The military's the same way. They promise you honor, purpose, brotherhood. Then they order you to slaughter innocents and call you a traitor when you refuse. It was the most he'd shared about his past since telling her about his desertion. Encouraged, Ryanna asked, "What happened after you refused the order at Fearos?" Thorne's eyes grew distant. "I warned the colonists, helped evacuate who I could before the bombardment started. My squad commander discovered what I was doing and tried to stop me. We fought. I won." His hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his face. "I was branded a traitor, stripped of rank, sentenced to execution, escaped during transport to the prison moon." "How long have you been hiding here?" 3 years, give or take, long enough to build a life of sorts." He gestured around the sparse bunker. "It's not much, but it's free." Ryanna studied him. "Don't you ever want more?" Before he could answer, an alarm blared from his surveillance system. Thorne leapt to his feet, checking the perimeter sensors. "Imperial scouts," he said grimly, pointing to the display showing 2 figures in distinctive armor moving across a ridge a kilometer away. "First I've seen in over a year." Ryanna's blood ran cold. "They're searching for me." "Probably. The question is whether they know you're still alive or are just confirming your death." Thorne pulled on his acid-resistant gear. "Either way, we need to know what we're dealing with." "I'm coming with you," Ryanna said, reaching for her own gear. Thorne looked like he wanted to object, but nodded. "Stay low, stay quiet. These won't be ordinary soldiers if they're hunting royalty." They moved silently through the toxic landscape, using natural formations for cover. As they approached the ridge where the scouts had been spotted, Thorne held up a hand, signaling Ryanna to stop. He pointed to a narrow crevice in the rocks, and they slipped inside, finding a vantage point that overlooked a small Imperial shuttle. 3 scouts now stood around a holographic display, their faces hidden behind specialized helmets. "Confirmed rebel activity in the Soleus sector," one was saying. "Intelligence suggests they're regrouping, despite the princess's elimination." "The council wants absolute confirmation of termination," another replied. "Her body was never recovered from the drop site." "No one could survive on this rock without shelter and supplies," the 3rd scout argued. "The council doesn't pay us for assumptions. We complete the sweep, check the mining records for any registered inhabitants, then move to the next sector." Ryanna and Thorne exchanged glances. The scouts didn't know she was alive, but they soon would discover Thorne's presence in the mining records. "We need to leave," Thorne whispered. "Now." As they carefully backed away, Ryanna's foot dislodged a small stone. The tiny sound echoed in the silence. All 3 scouts turned toward the crevice, weapons raised. "Movement detected," one announced. 2 heat signatures northeast quadrant." Thorne grabbed Ryanna's arm. "Run." The acid rain hissed against the rock formations as Thorne and Ryanna sprinted through the treacherous terrain. Pulse bolts struck the ground behind them, sending up sprays of caustic soil. "Split up," Thorne shouted over the comlink built into their protective masks. "I'll draw them west, circle back to the bunker and grab the emergency packs." Ryanna hesitated only a moment before veering east, ducking low behind a ridge of crystallized minerals. She'd learned to trust Thorne's tactical instincts over the past months. 3 Imperial scouts were formidable opponents, elite soldiers trained specifically for hostile environments and high-value targets. Their armor would protect them from Terras Prime's atmosphere indefinitely, unlike the cobbled-together gear she and Thorne relied on. She heard Thorne fire several shots from his pulse rifle, deliberately making his position known. 2 of the scouts immediately changed direction, pursuing him. The 3rd continued on her trail. Ryanna pressed herself against the rock face, controlling her breathing. The scout's helmet would have thermal imaging, but the ambient heat from the mineral deposits might mask her signature if she remained still enough. She watched as the armored figure moved methodically through the ravine below, weapon at the ready. When the scout was directly beneath her position, Ryanna made her decision. She launched herself from the ridge, using the higher gravity of Terras Prime to add force to her attack. She landed squarely on the scout's back, driving the surprised soldier face first into the ground. Before he could recover, she jammed her knife into the junction between helmet and armor, the vulnerability Thorn had taught her to look for. The scout went limp. Rhyna quickly stripped him of his weapon, comm unit, and access codes. The Imperial armor was too large for her frame, but the advanced helmet would be invaluable. "Thorn," she said through their private channel, "I've neutralized one, status." His response came through between heavy breaths. "Pinned down in the western caves. They're being cautious, which buys us time." "I'm heading back to the bunker. I'll bring what we need." "No," his voice was firm. "Stick to evacuation plan Delta. The bunker's compromised now that they've found us. Meet at the secondary location with whatever you can carry." Rhyna wanted to argue, but knew he was right. Once Imperial forces identified an outlaw presence, they would call for reinforcements and perform a systematic sweep of the entire region. She reached the bunker 15 minutes later, quickly gathering the emergency supplies Thorn had prepared months ago for exactly this scenario. Portable shelter, concentrated rations, medical supplies, ammunition, and most importantly, the compact communication array he'd salvaged from a crashed freighter. As she worked, she activated the scout's comm unit, listening to the Imperial chatter. "Unit 3 not responding. Coordinates on the registered inhabitant. Former Imperial Force Commander Thorn Valen, deserted after Feroz. Priority upgrade on this mission. Reinforcements dispatched from the Helix station." Rhyna froze at the last transmission. Reinforcements already en route meant the scouts had called this in before approaching their position, which meant this wasn't a random search. Somehow, they'd known to look here specifically. She finished packing, then activated the bunker's self-destruct sequence, another of Thorn's paranoid but now clearly justified precautions. Nothing would remain that could lead the Imperials to their next location. The secondary meeting point was an abandoned atmospheric processor 30 kilometers south. The journey would take hours through the toxic landscape, but the processor's massive structure would provide cover from Imperial scanners. Halfway there, she spotted a plume of black smoke rising from the western caves. Her heart clenched, but she forced herself to continue. Thorn was a survivor. He would make it. The atmospheric processor loomed like a dead metal giant against the red-tinged sky of Terrace Prime. Rhyna approached cautiously, scanning for any sign of Imperial presence. The massive facility had been abandoned when the initial mining operations shut down, its machinery left to corrode in the caustic atmosphere. She made her way through the labyrinthine structure, following the path she and Thorn had scouted months earlier. The central processing chamber would be their rendezvous point, defensible, with multiple escape routes. Hours passed with no sign of Thorn. Rhyna busied herself setting up the communication array, trying to access Imperial channels for any information. Finally, as the dim light of Terrace Prime's distant sun began to fade, she heard movement in the corridor outside. She raised her stolen Imperial pulse rifle, finger poised on the trigger. Thorn staggered into the chamber, his protective gear torn and acid burned in several places. Blood seeped from a wound in his leg, but he was alive. "You made it," she said, the relief in her voice surprising even her. "Barely," he collapsed onto a makeshift seat. "They weren't trying to kill me. They wanted me alive for questioning." "About me." He nodded grimly, allowing her to treat his wounded leg. "This wasn't a random patrol, Rhyna. They came looking specifically for me for us. Someone knew I would help you." "How is that possible? No one knew I survived." "Someone did." Thorn winced as she applied a sealing agent to his wound. "I intercepted some of their communications. There's a substantial bounty on both our heads now." Rhyna sat back on her heels, mind racing. "We can't stay on Terrace Prime. The entire planet will be crawling with Imperial forces within days." "I know," Thorn gestured to his pack. "That's why I took a detour to pay an old contact at the southern mining colony. Traded some valuable Imperial tech from our scout friends for 2 berths on a smuggler's ship leaving tonight." Rhyna stared at him. "You're coming with me." Thorn met her gaze steadily. "I made my choice the moment I picked you up instead of leaving you to die. Besides," he added with a grim smile, "I'm already a dead man to the Empire. Might as well make it count for something." She placed her hand on his. "Where will this smuggler take us?" "Nexus Station. It's a trading hub outside Imperial jurisdiction. From there, we can decide our next move. Our next move is clear, Ryana said, her voice taking on the royal authority that had once commanded armies. We find what's left of my rebellion and we take back what's mine. Thorne studied her face, seeing the transformation from survivor back to leader. You really think you can retake the throne after all this time? I know I can, she said with absolute conviction, but I can't do it alone. The question hung unspoken between them. Was he willing to go from surviving to fighting, from hiding to warfare against the most powerful empire in the galaxy? Outside, the distant rumble of Imperial dropships breaking atmosphere provided its own kind of answer. Nexus Station hung like a tarnished jewel in the void between three contested star systems. Neither Imperial territory nor truly free, it existed in the nebulous space where commerce outweighed politics. Its spinning rings housed everything from luxury trading houses to the worst kinds of smuggler dens. For Ryana and Thorne, it had been home for 3 tense weeks as they gathered intelligence and resources. Their cramped quarters in the station's lower levels were a far cry from either royal chambers or even the bunker on Terrace Prime, but they served their purpose: anonymity. Ryana stood before a makeshift strategic display, her hair now cut short, and dyed a deep burgundy to disguise her distinctive appearance. The silver blue of her skin was concealed beneath synthetic pigmentation, making her look like any other mixed-species trader. Only her eyes remained unchanged, burning with the same determination that had first convinced Thorne to save her. The latest transmission from Kel confirms it, she said, pointing to a blinking node on their star map. There are still 5 active resistance cells operating within Zarin space. Small, disorganized, but loyal. Thorne leaned against the wall, arms crossed. The weeks of relative safety had allowed his wounds to heal, but the hardness in his expression remained. Loyal to what? A princess who's been presumed dead for nearly a year. The Council has had plenty of time to solidify their narrative. Then we change the narrative. Ryana zoomed in on a specific location. The Jubilee of Ascension begins in 2 weeks. Every member of the Council will be gathered at the Grand Palace for the ceremonies. It's the perfect opportunity. It's also a suicide mission, Thorne countered. Security will be impenetrable. Not for someone who knows every secret passage and blind spot in the palace security grid. A smile tugged at the corner of Ryana's mouth. I grew up there, remember? The passages I used to sneak out as a child are still there. Before Thorne could respond, the door to their quarters slid open. Both reached for weapons, but relaxed when they recognized their visitor, Merrick, a grizzled information broker with a network that extended deep into Imperial territory. You've got company, Merrick growled without preamble. Imperial agents, 3 of them, asking questions about off-worlders from Terrace Prime. How close are they? Thorne asked, already moving to gather their essential gear. Too close. They're in Sector 4 now, working their way down. You've got maybe an hour before they reach this level. Ryana exchanged a glance with Thorne. We need more time. The contact from the Resistance isn't scheduled to arrive until tomorrow. Merrick scratched his stubbled chin. I might be able to help with that. Got a maintenance shaft that leads to the old docking rings. Nobody uses them since the hull breached 2 years back, but there's still atmosphere in sections C through E. What about our contact? Ryana asked. I'll redirect them, but it'll cost you extra. Thorne tossed him a credit chip, already factored into your payment. As Merrick left to make arrangements, Ryana quickly gathered their intelligence data, encrypting what they couldn't take. This changes our timeline. It changes everything, Thorne said grimly. If Imperial agents traced us to Nexus, it means they've been tracking our movements since we left Terrace Prime. We've got a leak somewhere. The revelation hung heavy between them. Someone in their limited network of contacts, perhaps even someone in what remained of Ryana's resistance, was feeding information to the Empire. They moved quickly through the maintenance shaft, a cramped tunnel that smelled of oxidized metal and leaked coolant. The old docking rings were eerie in their abandonment, once bustling corridors now silent and dim, emergency lighting casting long shadows. We'll hold position in Docking Bay E7, Thorne said, consulting the station schematic Merrick had provided. It's defendable if they find us with a clear route to the emergency shuttles. Ryana nodded, then suddenly stopped. Thorne, she said quietly, you don't have to stay, this isn't your fight. He turned to face her, surprise evident in his expression. "What are you talking about?" "The Empire wants me. You could disappear, find another remote planet. You've survived this long." "Stop," his voice was firm. "I didn't drag you off that toxic rock, patch you up, teach you to survive just to abandon you now. This isn't about survival anymore," she pressed. "What comes next is war. People will die, many people. I've accepted that burden because the Zarin Empire is my responsibility, but it's not yours." Thorne stepped closer, his weathered face serious in the dim light. "You still don't understand, do you? I was dead the moment I disobeyed that order on Fearos. Everything since has been borrowed time." He gestured around them. "Running, hiding, scavenging, that's not living. What you're doing, fighting for something that matters, that's worth dying for." Before she could respond, a distant alarm began to sound. Moments later, Merrick's voice came through their comm channel. "They've found your quarters. They're locking down all transportation off the station." Ryana made a split-second decision. "Change of plans, we're not running." "What?" Both Thorne and Merrick responded simultaneously. "The Empire expects us to flee. Instead, we're going to strike first." Her eyes gleamed with the royal authority that had been dormant for too long. "Merrick, can you get a message to my contact? Tell them to gather every Resistance member they can trust and meet us at the coordinates I'm sending." "You're crazy," Merrick muttered, but there was admiration in his voice. "I'll do it." Thorne studied her face. "What are you planning?" "The Empire has been hunting us. It's time we become the hunters." Ryana activated her tactical display. "The Imperial flagship Dominion is currently docked at Nexus's upper ring. It's the personal vessel of Counselor Vex, the architect of my downfall and the most vulnerable member of the Council." Understanding dawned on Thorne's face. "You want to capture an Imperial flagship?" "Not capture, commandeer." Her smile was fierce. "With a Council member as our guest. Even if we succeed, and that's a massive if, the Empire will throw everything they have at us." "Exactly. They'll be so focused on recovering their precious counselor and flagship that they won't be prepared for our real target, the Grand Palace during the Jubilee." She placed her hand on his arm. "This isn't just about revenge, Thorne. It's about showing the people that the Resistance still lives, that there's still hope." For a moment he was silent, weighing the impossible odds against the fire in her eyes, the same fire that had made him save her that first day on Terrace Prime. "Well," he finally said, checking the charge on his pulse rifle, "if we're going to die anyway, might as well make it spectacular." 12 hours later, as the Imperial flagship Dominion broke from Nexus Station with unauthorized thrusters at full burn, alarms blaring across all Imperial channels, Ryana stood on the command deck. Beside her, Thorne coordinated with the small but determined crew of Resistance fighters who had answered her call. Below in the brig, Counselor Vex raged impotently, his capture already transmitting across secured Resistance frequencies throughout the Zarin Empire, proof that the exiled princess wasn't just alive, but returning to reclaim her throne. Ryana gazed out at the stars, feeling the weight of the crown she would soon reclaim and the responsibility it carried. The path ahead would be bloody and difficult, but for the first time since her betrayal, it was clear. She turned to find Thorne watching her, his expression a mixture of concern and pride. "Having second thoughts?" she asked. "About following the most dangerous woman in the galaxy into certain death," he smiled, the scar on his face crinkling. "Not a single one." As the Dominion accelerated toward Zarin space, Ryana knew that whatever came next, victory or defeat, throne or death, she would no longer face it alone. The storm was rising, and this time she would be at its center.